Hi everyone, it's John. This week I have another book review for you. It's a book I have shown recently on this channel that I added to my collection and then also shown again on maybe the last Friday Reads or maybe the one before that. I don't post those very often, but I worked on this for a while. It is The Holy Roman Empire, A Short History by Barbara Stollberg-Rilinger. This was originally published in German. The English translation is put out, as you can tell by the little P there at the bottom, by Princeton University Press. And I guess you have to start off any book review about the Holy Roman Empire with the old saw that Voltaire gave us about it being neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Having existed for nearly 1,000 years, it remains kind of infamously opaque and obscure, even with a past that most history lovers aren't terribly familiar with, and that would include even me. At just about 160 pages, this little book by Barbara Stollberg-Rilinger, like I said, originally published in German in 2006, really hits a sweet spot in that it provides just enough political and institutional history of the empire to understand both its functions and its dysfunctions during its last 3 centuries. That would be roughly 1495 to 1806. The English translation, like I already told you, was published by Princeton University Press in 2018. Stating what the empire was is just as difficult as stating what it wasn't. It wasn't, quote, according to the author, a state or confederation of states, because it lacked many of the qualities of early modern statehood. It could variously be seen as a loose political body tied together by feudal bonds of fealty to an overlord, the emperor, a legal association under a common juridical authority with shared legislative powers aimed at establishing a community of diplomacy and peace, or perhaps a complex political association of corporations brought together based largely on the shared principles of both tradition and consensus. In short, it's not the easiest political body to characterize. The time period stated above, 1495 to 1806, bookends the events from the Diet of Worms to the dissolution of the empire under Napoleonic pressures. And no, not the 1521 Diet of Worms, where Martin Luther was called to apologize for his doctrine in response to a papal bull by Leo X. This Diet of Worms, the one I'm referring to earlier, 1495, occurred a generation earlier and consisted of a long series of complicated institutional reforms that the empire tried to put into place. These 3 centuries, roughly, were critical because of the ways that they structurally changed the empire, socially, culturally, and religiously, with the biggest of these changes being the events that followed directly from the Reformation. This book is more for the interested generalist, but Stollberg-Rilinger still has her pet topics of interest, most notably the roles and importance of tradition played in the empire versus innovation and public ritual. Many of the territories that continued to be affiliated with the empire over time, but remained connected in older feudal ways, more associated with the Middle Ages than what we would really call modernity. These states include Savoy, Northern Italy, and the Swiss Confederation. And these states really take a back seat to the larger territories that went on to build stronger diplomatic and political relationships with one another. Stollberg-Rilinger emphasizes the empire as one that ran on consensus and cooperation, and that's a theme that she really hits home throughout the entire book. In fact, if you're unfamiliar with the empire, the electors of individual territories They're actually called electors because they are elected. Um, and the emperor himself is actually elected by the electors. A practice that actually dated back to old Roman tribes. It was only later, early on in the Middle Ages, that hereditary succession was introduced across a variety of European states. Stollberg-Rilinger offers up a really great revisionist history of the Peace of Westphalia. And she suggests that instead of making the empire weaker and more unstable, as it has been written about in previous histories, that the peace actually buoyed the strength of the empire's institutions and rituals. This actually goes on to backfire as some of the more well-established territories like Brandenburg Prussia and Austria used their legal rights and liberties codified in the Peace of Westphalia as a political cudgel, set of political cudgels, against their neighboring territories. Thus, it wasn't the great political and social forces of the time that tore the empire apart, she argues, but rather the venality of its members and its own decreasing political unity. Her analysis of the Peace of Augsburg, I thought, was just as great and just as compelling. One could easily be forgiven for thinking that a book with the Holy Roman Empire for its subject would be stuffily academic, but it's actually not, despite the fact that it's put out by Princeton University. The author manages to make the occasionally mentioned historiographical quibble, say, like the fact that the 19th century historians had a tendency to see the late empire as a gigantic, lumbering failure. She makes these cases and these observations interesting to even the layperson. It's very well written. It's clear, not boring, and has the increasingly rare virtue of, as you can tell, concision, which I appreciate. For all intents and purposes, for a cursory introduction to the last third of the empire, it's a great place to start and to end, unless your interests just aren't satisfied by 160 pages of sharp, elegantly written history. The only negative I can see here is that the first 400 years of the empire aren't covered at all, not even in the first few pages, which means that you'll ultimately have to go elsewhere if you want a large sort of eagle's eye view of the entire empire. But for the empire in early modern history, this might be a one-stop shop. The Holy Roman Empire, a short history, put out by Princeton University Press by Barbara Stollberg-Rilinger. Thanks, everyone, and I will see you next week.